Welcome to the 359th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. Stay tuned for my interview with award-winning author Richard Thomas, novelist and short story writer, and author of 3 short story collections, Staring into the Abyss, Herniated Roots, and Tribulations. Stay tuned for the interview. The Reading and Writing Podcast is brought to you by Libro FM. Libro.fm lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 185,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there, but you'll be part of a different story. One that supports your local community and your local bookstore. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. You can listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Here's your special offer from the Reading and Writing Podcast. Get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 today with your first month of membership with the code RWPodcast at checkout. This offer is only valid for new members in Canada and the U.S. Check out Libro.fm today. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Richard Thomas, writer, editor, teacher, and past editor-in-chief of Gamut Magazine and Dark House Press. He's the author of 3 novels as well as 3 short story collections, including Staring into the Abyss, Herniated Roots, and Tribulations. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sure. If someone listening isn't familiar with your work, your novels, your many short stories, and your collections, how would you describe yourself as a writer?
Oh, that's a good question. When I first started writing, I would say I was probably more of a realist. I came up, I saw Fight Club and got excited and went to the website when I discovered that Chuck Palahniuk had written the book and basically started reading all of his stuff, which I guess you'd call transgressive, satirical. It's a weird mix of storytelling that Chuck does, but it's pretty compelling stuff. And that led me to a couple of other authors, Will Christopher Bear and Craig Clevenger and Stephen Graham Jones. So I started out writing Neo-Noir, which if you're not familiar with Neo-Noir, you might be familiar with classic noir, film noir, which has a certain atmosphere and bleakness to it. Neo-noir just means new black. So it's contemporary dark fiction that takes that kind of atmosphere that noir had and doesn't follow the prescription. So it's not quite as formulaic. You don't have to have a detective or a cop or a femme fatale. It's a little more open. In movie terms, you might think of movies like Mulholland Drive or Memento or Blade Runner. So I started out writing that, neo-noir, more gritty realism, and then decided to get my MFA in 2012, and that kind of brought a literary aspect to my work, working in some black sheeps from the literary community, everybody from Joyce Carol Oates and Margaret Atwood and Toni Morrison to Cormac McCarthy and Dennis Johnson, Mary Gateskill, Haruki Murakami. It's a really weird mix of kind of contemporary literary outcasts and weirdos. And then I'd say in the last, I've been writing about 12 years now. In the last, 5 years or so, I've leaned more into horror and speculative fiction, which is like an umbrella term to cover like fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. So that I'm leaning more into the uncanny and the new weird, with, whether it's monsters or, Lovecraftian, unknown and chaos, cosmic horror, or just kind of unsettling surrealism. So it's a blend of different genres, hybrid work, I'd say. So really the main difference between, I think, the new weird, which comes out of the old weird, which was basically Lovecraft and then kind of Clive Barker's visceral body horror, is that Neo-Noir is usually realistic, so there's not much supernatural in it, although Angel Heart may be the exception to it. Whereas the new Weird definitely leans into supernatural and monsters and the unknown in definitely in surreal and abstract ways. So that's kind of where I am now, mostly focusing on writing short stories, and I'm trying to write my next book, this Arctic horror. But it's hard sometimes to write horror when the world around you is, stranger than the fiction you're writing. So,
sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I am right now.
Well, you've written more than 100 short stories. I'm curious, is the writing of a short story always the same for you? And what's that creation process like for you? Do you start out with an idea or a concept or an image or setting? How does that work for you?
Yeah, great question. I think short stories are really important. I encourage all my students to start out with short stories so they can play around with everything from, point of view and setting, mythology, your formula, your structure, first person, third person, different like loops and weird narratives. I think you can play around with a story, whether it's, flash fiction at 1,000 words. I just got done teaching a flash fiction class over at Lit Reactor, or like a standard story, which is, up to like 7,500, whether you're 3,000 or 5,000, or if you're over that into like novelette or novella range, and then leading up into novels. So I think it's a great way to experiment with genre and play around and try things out. For me, writing a short story, now that I've been doing it for a while and, hopefully have it figured out at this point how to do it, I come at it different ways. First of all, I'm more of a pantser, so versus a plotter. So I tend not to plan out my stories. I go at them more from one idea or one emotion. So I'd rather come at it from a concept or a feeling and then work my way forward from a place of instinct and emotion, knowing that, hey, I think this is going to be a story. It's going to be a horror story. Has something to do with doppelgangers. All I know is that my character thinks he sees something. Let's just move forward from there and see what happens. I'm also what I guess you would call a method writer. You probably have heard of a method actor, and that I try and become the character that I'm writing. So while I don't always go out and take a ride along with police or go to a morgue or something, I do try and inhabit the space of the protagonist and behave and think as if I were them. So I usually have some general idea of where I'm going when I write. I use Freytag's pyramid or Freytag's triangle as part of my structure, which is a narrative hook, an exciting incident, that moment in time after which things will never be the same again, exposition where you build your world, increasing your tension, internal, external conflicts leading up to like a climax resolution, change, and denouement, which is basically the epiphany and understanding of what had happened. So that's kind of the framework I hang my artwork on, my storytelling on. But I mean, how I get from point A to point Z really kind of depends on the moment. So I try to play around and explore it and let the story come to me, knowing what I have to put in there to make it work. Usually what I teach my students in like my short story mechanics class and my contemporary dark fiction class is that if something's not working, you probably screwed up one of the key things in Freytag, that you left a major conflict unresolved, or we don't care about your character because you don't get us to their internal conflict and we don't understand what's motivating them, or your ending didn't work because it didn't align with your narrative hook and your inciting incident, so you're not really ending it and then resolving it and nothing changes. So usually when something's not working, it's one of those things. But I mean, as far as where I get the ideas for my stories, it's all over the place. It's what you see on TV. It's some weird thing you're fascinated by, something you watch on a weird TV show, something you've seen in the world. I have 2 stories coming out this year. We were just talking a second ago about, what work do I have coming out. One is in Cemetery Dance, and it's basically a kind of paranoid thriller where the guy feels like he's done something really bad, but he can't prove it. And so it's all the paranoia and the clues and the things that are around him, even to the point of him going to a police station and trying to confess, but they can't find anything. So I like to play around with the idea of perception and truth, and what we see, what we don't see, lies, secrets, that kind of stuff. The other story coming out in the Prisms anthology with PS Publishing is one of my first person plural. I wrote a story called Asking for Forgiveness, which starts off as we, but I would say this story is more of a multiple personality story. So that's the first time I've done that. So I think having written, 100, 150 stories, yeah, I do. I have a certain style, right? People know what a Richard Thomas story is that they've been reading me, and I try and make sure I deliver on the expectation. But above and beyond that, I want to write something that excites me, something I haven't done a million times, and then try and play around with form and function and structure and genre and expectation in ways that can surprise the reader and take you someplace you haven't been before, while at the same time fulfilling the expectation of what I promised you from the beginning of the story. So, I know I'm throwing a lot at you here. It's kind of complicated, but, at the end of the day, it's basically, what did I promise you? And then can I deliver it? And can I surprise you along the way and do something that is satisfying and fulfilling? Whether I'm trying to scare you or unsettle you or turn you on or make you laugh or enlighten you, whatever I'm trying to do, I want to make sure I'm somewhere in the ballpark by the end of the story that I've done what I set out to do.
Well, I know you teach writing. Are there common mistakes that you often see in short stories with students in your classes and workshops?
Oh, most definitely. A couple things. One thing is a lack of originality. So you can write a story that's a good story, but while it technically may work, the fact that we've seen that story done before a lot, whether it's a trope, or if vampires are overdone or zombies or werewolves, whatever, whether it's waking up to start a story, always relying, killing people off as a choice, a plot choice, just really doing nothing original. I think you have to do something original with your stories and your novels, whether it's the beauty of your prose, your casting of characters, how diverse is your cast? Are you bringing us a different set of characters? Where we're expecting a man and you gave us a woman. We're expecting one thing and you gave us another. Just playing against type, different mythology. Instead of doing the same old Greco-Roman Western mythology, are you tapping into mythologies from your culture and your place, where you grew up, in your family bloodline and history, whether it's Japan or Australia or Africa or Poland or whatever. I think of the first time I read a Wendigo story or a Baba Yaga story or whatever it is. So I think originality is one thing that a lot of new students don't push for. And if you're not reading a lot and writing a lot, then you're not probably even aware that you're being, cliche. So I encourage my students to read a lot. If you're going to write horror, you have to read the masters. So you have to read all the big names, and then you have to read kind of your contemporaries, because if you don't understand what's happening now, what's selling now, and what's happening, you could not only be redundant and cliche and expected, but be writing towards a story that's just being told a lot. So I think that's one big mistake, is a lack of originality. And I think the other one is basically kind of what I was talking about a second ago, is that something's not working in your structure and your freight tag and the mechanics of your story. So whether you take a really long time to hook us, don't go deep enough into your characters so that we care, don't have authority, you don't resolve the main issues, external and internal, your ending doesn't address the main issues in a powerful way that's satisfying. And quite often people are lacking the denouement, the understanding of what had happened, which I think is quite often the last part of your short story or novel or TV show or a movie, is that insight into what happened. So usually it's one of those mechanical things along the way. And then obviously, students, new writers are just, the formatting's bad or the grammar's wrong, or a lot of typos and mistakes, a lot of, tense shifts and head hopping and kind of just, rudimentary, story mechanics that aren't working. I think those are probably the three things I see the most that get in the way of people. And then if kind of a more advanced technique or advanced element is that I really like to see people who can figure out what their voice is and then write to their strengths. So while Chuck Palahniuk was a big influence on me starting out, I don't write like Chuck. And while I grew up reading Stephen King, I don't write like Stephen King. Chuck's a minimalist. I'm a maximalist. Stephen King's much more of a storyteller, and I'm much more of a story shower. But they were great influencers on me, and they taught me how to tell a story. So they're great storytellers. So I think as far as being a writer, figure out what your voice is, what kind of stories you're trying to tell, what genres you're writing, who influenced you, what you're into, not just with writing. One of the first quizzes I give students in my classes is, give me your top 5 short stories, novels, authors, TV shows, movies, even albums. Sometimes I'll ask them, and take a look at all that and see what kind of a vibe you're putting out there, because you can probably learn from that. If those are your influences, if that's what you love to look at and be entertained by, that might tell you who you are as a person and what you're going to put into your writing. Now, obviously, sometimes we go to watch a lot of funny things because we write dark things and then we want to break from it. But I found that typically when people list those things, it really is a window into their soul as not just as a writer, but a human being, which might really help you to understand the motivation behind the kind of stories you want to tell. Do you want to tell, hope punk, inspiring, hopeful stories? Do you want to tell really bleak narratives that are cautionary tales? And then everything in between, including whatever genre or hybrid you want to put together.
Gotcha. So what prompted you to start submitting your first stories for publication? And I'm assuming that you probably got some rejections along the way. And what was that experience like for you? Because I know that some people who are interested in writing write a few stories, start sending them out, and then when they get rejected, they kind of give up. So what was your early beginnings in terms of submissions and trying to seek publication, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question too. It's funny because I know when my first professional sale was, but I immediately thought of being 22, living downtown Chicago with my typewriter in a studio apartment, sending out these short stories to Omni magazine, and like how bad the stories were and how I got rejected. I was like, I failed miserably. I didn't even really start writing seriously until probably 10 years later, maybe even longer. But I think those early failures, that's probably an experience a lot of people have. When I started getting serious about it at the age of 40, now I'm 52, I was taking some classes. In fact, I was taking a class with Craig Clevenger, and I'd written I hadn't written in a long time. It was my first class in probably 20 years. And I came out of that class thinking, maybe I can write okay. Maybe this isn't, maybe I rediscovered my love of writing. And Craig was very supportive, had a lot of really nice things to say about my writing. And he encouraged me to send my work out. And he encouraged me to send out a story called Stillness. And I was really kind of hemming and hawing, didn't want to do it. I didn't feel like I was ready. I didn't know what I was doing. But he really was super supportive and very encouraging. So I said, okay. And I did all the wrong things, just like you asked. I sent that story to like the New Yorker and the Paris Review and all these places that not only was I not going to get in because I wasn't good enough yet, but it was the wrong genre. I was sending them, horror, and they published literary fiction. So probably the first couple of months of doing that, I just was doing totally the wrong thing. Once I started looking around a little bit and studying the markets and really considering where my work might fit, reading magazines, reading online websites, and really studying the markets, I started sending it to more appropriate places. One of the places I sent it to was Cemetery Dance. And because I wanted to get into the magazine, I'd been a longtime fan of Cemetery Dance as a publisher. I'd been buying their books and magazines for years, my whole life, really. And I thought that's where I want to be. So I sent out a story, and I got an email back from them saying that they wanted to publish my story, but not in the magazine, in an anthology instead, called Shivers. Now, at the time, believe it or not, even though I was a fan, I'd never heard of the anthology series. So my first response was that I was kind of disappointed because I hadn't heard of it. It was pretty irregularly published. I wanted to be in the magazine, right? But I was like, yeah, sure, of course. Of course it was a big yes. And then it was, not only did I get rejected by probably 10, 20, 30 markets before they took that story, but then I waited for probably 6 months or a year for them to announce the table of contents. And I was, obviously losing my mind waiting for them to announce it. But they kept telling me, just wait, be patient. Brian Freeman over there was like, just wait, it's going to be good, trust me. And then when they announced it, I was in Shiver 6 alongside Stephen King and Peter Straub and Keelan Patrick Burke and a bunch of other authors. It was really a huge deal to me. I cried when I saw Table of Contents. I mean, here's my childhood idol that I'm going to be publishing next to. So getting my story in there was a huge break for me and really did a lot for my confidence. After that, I started submitting more. I use duotrope.com to track my submissions. I think it's one of the best markets, one of the best tools out there. It's like $50 a year. But if you're sending out multiple stories, you can really do a lot of great research. You can track everything, and it really helps me to stay on top of it. When it came out of my MFA program, at one point I had 7 stories out to over 100 markets. There's no way I could have tracked that to see like where have I sent a story, where do I have a story currently, doing the research on what markets were open for what genres. It's a difficult part to being a writer, but it's an essential part to what you do. If you don't submit and stand up for your work, nobody else is going to do that. So, I mean, I've had stories that have been rejected 10, 20, 40, 60, 100 times before landing in an elite market. In fact, I got into Cemetery Dance, the magazine, twice. And both times I was rejected probably, I think the first time was maybe 20 rejections and the second time was like 40 rejections. And both times it took, I think, almost 500 days to place those stories, waiting for people to get back to me, waiting for Tor, waiting for all these places, trying to honor the no simultaneous submission policies, and then waiting for markets to take a long time. But then to get into Cemetery Dance twice, after bouncing around for a year and a half and getting so many rejections, I was thrilled because you start to lose faith in the story. But every time I go back and open up the stories and look at them, I'd be like, nope, I like it. I'm not going to change anything. Maybe I'd find a typo or something, but when I'm done writing my stories, I'm done. And just because editors might send me feedback saying, yeah, I didn't quite buy it or didn't like the character or whatever, doesn't mean you have to go back and rework your story. It just may mean it's not the right story for them. I mean, your story could be missing something. It could be messed up. It could be flawed. That's why you workshop. That's why you do all the hard work. That's why you really do everything you can to get your story right before you send it out. But once you commit to sending it out, never give up. Look for all the markets, horror markets, and then some stories are hybrid. They can actually probably cross over into fantasy or sci-fi depending on your focus. That's also why I write across broader genres. That's why I don't write only horror. I write fantasy, sci-fi, and horror to open up more markets. That's why I write literary fiction. That's why I write magical realism, so I can expand and send my stories to a wider range of people. But it's difficult. There are only so many markets, but I think if you're out there looking around, if you use something like Duotrope or Horror Tree or something, or Submission Grinder, they're great places to look. You'll find it. There's a lot of anthologies. There's always open calls. There's open call groups on Facebook. There's a lot of great places to do your research. And I would just say,
O'Reilly. This is Derek's O'Reilly Auto Parts story.
After the 3rd time jump-starting my car, I finally realized my battery was dying. So I stopped by O'Reilly to have it checked. They tested it right there in the parking lot. It was bad, real bad. But they helped me find the right battery for my car and even installed it for free. Now my car starts like new.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
To Spartans, there is no finish line for excellence. Little wonder MSU is a leading research university in the world's top 100. With 34 programs ranked in the top 25 nationally by U.S. News & World Report, and #1 programs in nuclear physics, supply chain management, and education. We are united by a passion to make a difference. See all we're making possible at msutoday.msu.edu. Spartans will.
Do your work, bust your ass, get your story right, really make sure you've got it down, workshop it, get your peers to chime in and do everything you can to get your story as not as done and as perfect as you can, and put everything you can into that story. Leave the blood, sweat, and tears on the page. Really put your all in it. Swing for the fences, and then never give up on it. And if you send out to all the pro markets and they're all full, then put it aside and wait for an anthology to open up. Don't settle. Don't just get hungry to publish it at any place just because you're impatient. Send your work to the right places and believe in yourself.
Great. So you've mentioned your MFA program. Where did you get your MFA, and what was that experience like for you? Because I know that some MFA programs kind of are not, that open to, for lack of a better word, genre or commercial fiction.
Yeah. There are some programs out there. I went out to UC Riverside in California. Stephen Graham Jones is out there, and Todd Goldberg runs it. It's a great program. There's some, I think it's Stone Coast out east. There's some great places that are open to popular and genre. But yeah, you're not wrong. I went to Murray State University down in Murray, Kentucky, because I had to do a low res program because I have a wife and kids, and I had to work, and I couldn't just go to school full time. So I looked around and applied to different low-res programs where you're on campus twice a year for like a week each time, 10 days each time. So you could just squeeze it in if you have like vacation. If you have 2 weeks vacation, you could just make it. So that's what I did. I think the program may actually be closing down, but it was a really good experience for me, but it wasn't always as supportive as I think it could have been. I got in there based on my neo-noir stories, which I would say were at the time more kind of gritty realism, crime thriller, horror stories. And then immediately once I got in, they were like, they wanted me basically to write literary short stories. So I got in there and wrote the first half of my novel, Disintegration, which I would say is like a neo-noir transgressive thriller, part thriller, part horror. Wrote the first semester, and my professor loved it. She didn't know the authors that were influencing it, so I sent her some books. She read them and said, okay, I see where you're coming from. And she really helped me to write the first half. And then my second semester, I went to another professor, because you have to do more than one professor. And he, who ended up becoming my thesis director, actually a really great writer, Pulitzer nominee, great guy, but very literary. I can remember in class, him asking the class, okay, at the end of the first page of this book, raise your hand if you keep reading. And nobody in class raised their hand. And after class, he basically came to me and said, I don't know if this is thesis material, which basically means I don't think it's good enough, which was crushing to me. I'd already had a book published. I'd already published some stories. I'd already written the first half of my book with another professor. And I almost dropped out of the program. What I decided to do was work on literary short stories with him, because I did have a bit of that gap in my knowledge. That my undergrad work was in advertising communications with a minor in psychology. And while I did take some writing classes, there were some gaps in there where I probably could have read more literary fiction. So I took that time to study with him, to absorb what he had to offer me, which was quite a lot. I just had to be flexible enough to be open to it, to take that literary influence and let it improve my writing, which I think I always wanted to do. And I think it makes my writing better to have that influence, to aim for a literary aspiration to your storytelling above and beyond just kind of standard kind of moving the chess pieces around the board. And I learned a lot. I wrote some great stories. All of them ended up getting published in good places, including one that ended up in Cemetery Dance, which is the one kind of non-literary story I had in my thesis. But I think what that helped me to do with my writing is I try to write on 3 levels. So people talk about genre versus literary and whether MFAs are worth it and whether you can be taught and all that stuff. I think there is definitely a benefit to it, getting an MFA to learn if you have the time and the money and you're interested. If you're up for it, go for it. But I don't think it's mandatory at all to be a writer. I think you can take a handful of classes with professionals. I think you can read some craft books and you can work on your writing, out here with the rest of us. But when I write on 3 levels, I'm trying to write, the main level is kind of the physical plane, moving the chess pieces around, where you write a story or a book that's just entertaining in a page turner. Can you see the action unfolding and follow it? And is it entertaining and surprising and compelling? That's one level. So I write my books and stories on that level to try and get to the broadest audience that just wants to read and be entertained. The next level for me is emotional or internal, where I try and go deeper and get you to care about the characters. So if I can get you to not only be entertained and, thrilled and horrified by the action, and then feel something about the characters deeply, where I might move you, that's, I think, going deep. That's better. That's the next level. The third level would be I think the literary influence comes in, where more intellectual, more thoughtful, more thought-provoking, more philosophical, that intellectual and spiritual aspect of your writing, like in the head. So it's body, mind, and soul, right? I'm trying to get you to work on 3 different planes. So I think the best stories I write and the best stories I like to read are stories and novels that work across all 3 levels, that grab you and entertain you and get you to turn the page while getting you to care and feel strong emotions and get you to think about what's happening, so that when you put the book down, you either want to pick it back up, or when you're done with the story, it stays with you and it resonates and it has that ripple effect where you can't stop thinking about it. So, I mean, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent there, but I do think that the MFA program can be helpful. I think you can learn a lot about writing and who you are as a writer. I think there are more and more programs that are open to genre writing and genre writers and who are beyond literary fiction. But I think there's also a consideration where you might look at, can I benefit from reading literary writers, because they are, they're literary giants and masters for a reason too. So I think it's a good thing to broaden your palette with that as well.
Sure. Well, do you share your stories with anyone else before you submit them?
I used to. When I was first writing, I was in a group called Write Club, kind of a play on Fight Club.
Sure.
And every year we would, it was like 20 of us, 25 people, and you would workshop a novel, or you could workshop a collection of stories. And like on a list of 20 people, say you're number 5, there would be 2 people on either side, 3 and 4 and 6 and 7, and they would be your peers. And so you would concentrate on those writings over the course of a year, and you get extensive feedback. I did that for a number of years. I workshopped my novel Disintegration in there, and a number of stories and whatnot, and that really helped me a lot. I was in workshops over at the Cult before it all moved over to Lit Reactor, which ended up creating the anthology Burnt Tongues, which I ended up co-editing with Chuck Palahniuk and Dennis Widmeyer. So stories came out of that workshop, and I've taken other classes online where I, would workshop stories in class. I probably took 6 or 7 different classes before I got my MFA, studying with people like Craig Clevenger and Stephen Graham Jones and Max Berry and Monica Drake and Jack Ketchum, a number of different people that helped me. So for a long time, yeah, I wouldn't write a short story unless I bounced it off of somebody. Eventually, several years in, probably, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 5 years into my writing career at Write Club, I basically realized that I wasn't listening to people anymore. I think that basically once I got my MFA and come out of that, I felt pretty well equipped to write and edit my stuff. The hard thing with the workshop, and I talk about this in my column, my Storyville column over at Lit Reactor, is that not everybody's going to get what you're trying to do. Not everybody understands you, and not everybody has the tools to help you with different aspects of your writing. So like when I was in Write Club, there were some people who are really good about setting. And so I listened to them about setting. My friend Nick Corpon was in there. He's a writer. He was really good about all the Neo-Noir stuff. So I trusted him with that. There was a woman in there, Pelavia, who was really good with the sexual aspects. And so anything sexy or erotic, like I would, ask her. So if it worked for her, I knew I was on the right path. Other people, like they're the kind of reviewers, they would read your story and peers and say, I don't get it. And every paragraph is like, what's this? I don't get it. And what I realized at the end of the day is that they're not my audience and they don't get my work and they're never going to get my work, but I can't simplify it. I can't dumb it down. I can't push everything to the middle and make it safe and easy, because then I'm not really writing what I want to write and I'm not swinging for the fences. So at some point in the workshop, I realized it was time for me to kind of graduate because I wasn't really listening to anybody anyway. And I was harder on myself than anybody else. And I knew the kind of stories I wanted to write. So at that point, having written, 50, 60 stories already and having gotten my MFA, I felt like I should just do my own thing because it'll streamline the process. I know what I'm trying to do. I trust that my instincts are right. And I'm going to be harder on myself than anybody anyway. So I'm just going to tear it apart. I think as you advance as a writer, your instincts get better so that your rough drafts become less and less rough. I mean, I don't know of anybody who's a fan of editing. I mean, I guess there are some people out there who love to edit, but, and I do appreciate it because when you're trimming a story or working on a book, when you go from, hacking at it with a chainsaw to down to like a hatchet to like a chef's knife and then down to like a scalpel, you're working from the big to the small and you're trimming away the fat and you're getting rid of the things you don't need and you're fine tuning so that by the time you get that last edit done, it should actually feel really good because you're realizing how tight your story is and how good your story is. And what you're doing at this point is only making it better to the point where when I'm doing my last round of edits, I mean, I'm changing a word for rhythm. I'm changing a word that's ED to ING because it flows better. I'm looking at the length of sentences, long and short. I'm looking at how many sentences start with I. I'm balancing it so that it's a more hypnotic, lyrical story, as well as all the plot elements and the character and the setting and the depth and all the freight tag stuff. So, I think workshops are great. And I think getting peers to look at your work, and especially people especially if they're a little better than you, I think it's always beneficial if you can hang in a group or workshop where everyone's just a little bit better than you. If you're the best writer in the class, if you're the smartest person in the room, like find another room, right? Yeah. Because that's the only thing that's going to keep pushing you and pulling you up and trying to get you to get beyond where you are. Because otherwise I don't want you to get stagnant and to kind of plateau and stop.
Sure. Well, I know that you've worked as an editor for several publications, Gamut, Dark House Press, and you've edited several short story anthologies. What was the editing process like for you to be on the other side of the desk, so to speak, from when you're submitting your own stories to magazines and anthologies? Right.
That's a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work. I think basically I started out. I think that The New Black was my first anthology. I had an idea. I wanted to put together this anthology of neo-noir stories, and I reached out to Curbside Press Curbside Books because they were I wanted to create an imprint with them, and so I talked to them, and they eventually approved it, and so that's how we created Dark House Press. So, as an editor, it definitely is the other side. You learn a lot. You make a lot of mistakes, especially early on. The New Black was an anthology where I put together, and I picked all the stories and the writers based upon who I love to read and what stories I was into. And that was a lot of fun. I got basically every story I wanted to put in there, except for maybe one or two, from a lot of my my favorite writers. Brian Evenson and Benjamin Percy, Roxane Gay, and Stephen Graham Jones, and just a wide range of people. It just was really exciting to put it together. Running a magazine and running a press is even more responsibility than that. So it's, on one hand, it's your aesthetic, right? I mean, you get to look at something and say, okay, here's my magazine, here's the vibe, here's what I'm looking for. Or here's the anthology we're putting together. Because after I did The New Black, we did one called Exigencies, which was all news stories. And we ended up getting a Shirley Jackson nomination, which was pretty exciting. And one of the stories in there also got a Shirley Jackson nomination. It's called Wilderness by Letitia Trent. And then it made it into Best Horror of the Year. So that was pretty rewarding for me as an editor and publisher. But I think you want to figure out your aesthetic, and you want to publish the kind of stories, the kind of books that like excite you. It's a lot of work. I mean, especially with the books, you have to read a lot. And with books, you have to read pretty far in. It's not the books that are bad or the books that are a bad fit. Those are easy to say no to. And it's not even the books that are amazing. When you read a book and it's amazing, I mean, you are going to have to read the whole thing all the way through, and that takes a lot of time. The ones that are amazing that blow you away, you get done reading and you're like, yep, I want to buy it. It's the ones that are somewhere in between where you're like, I don't know, and does this need some work? And like, is it do I like it enough? And, those are the books where you spend, you're reading, spending a lot of time reading and then either rejecting or accepting. But I will say that every book we publish at Dark House Press is a book that I'm proud of, and a book or collection or anthology that I fell in love with. And that's a really exciting thing to be on the other side of it, to get to put out there the kind of work that you love to read. Gamut was my most recent, publishing experience and editing experience. We did a Kickstarter where we raised $55,000. We had one glorious year. I should have raised more money, but at the time, 55 seemed like a huge amount of money to me. But it takes time to build a brand and a following. And I should have probably planned to make that a 3-year plan instead of a 1-year plan, because I think we could have gotten there. The reason we failed was that we just didn't get enough subscriptions. We got about half of what we needed. So I just didn't get enough people to sign up, unfortunately, to make it happen for a year or two. But I learned so much in that, with that publication. I had other editors that I hired who would help me read the slush. They would kick things up to me. We had to have you had to have 3 yeses or 3 nos, either way. And so I was always jumping in to be the third. If we're on the fence, we'd have a discussion about it. But what I loved about Gamut was that we really were pushing hard to broaden the spectrum of what we were publishing. So we knew the vibe, we knew the aesthetic of what we wanted. Contemporary dark fiction, this new, weird, uncanny, dark fiction with surrealism and emotion. And we were really pushing for diversity too. Not just to make sure we got women involved, but that we got, a wide range of people from different cultures, different races, different sexual orientation and identity from all over the world, so that we're publishing authors from not just the United States and Canada and the UK and Australia, which were our biggest markets, but stories from, Norway and Sweden and Germany and Poland and Japan, and just a wide range of voices, so that the mythology we got was different. The points of view we got were different. And that was just super rewarding to do that. Just so many exciting stories. And we read blind too. So I never knew who was sending stuff in. When I rejected stuff, I didn't know if it was a total stranger or a good friend, and we ended up publishing people pro sales, some people their first pro sale of their writing career, which I thought was really exciting too. At the end of the year, I think we had a really good experience. We published 60% of our stories were by women. In fact, I think our first 8 stories we took were by women. It was just a really good mix of voices. Editing is tough. I mean, you have to definitely deal with, the grammatical and the typos and the line editing of it. But I think more exciting really is the bigger picture, the developmental editing. It's working with these writers to tell great stories. It's always amazing and exciting when you get a story that really needs very little, if no work at all. And that happened quite a bit. There are a lot of stories I took that I didn't have to do a whole lot with. But there were also a handful of stories that I looked at and I go, I really like this story, but it's not quite there. And I would reach out to the author and say, I want to accept your story, but I need to make some changes to it. Would you work with me? And I want to work with you and help make the story better and fix a few things. Here's the things where I think it falls a bit short. I think with a little bit of work, we can really make this story sing. Would you be up for that? Are you open to that, to being edited and to working with me? And you know what? I'll tell you, Jeff, nobody said no. And those experiences were really exciting too. It's something I go through a lot in my classes, where I'm working with my students and they'll turn in a rough draft and we'll talk about it and we'll workshop it and we'll have our Skype call and I'll give them my edits. And that's the time that I have to talk to them about their work, for their peers to talk to them about their work, and for me to try and help make it better. And to see those stories go from a rough draft to a beautiful, polished story that ends up getting published somewhere, and sometimes someplace really nice, that's really super rewarding and exciting for me. So I think as an editor, I am a bit of a gatekeeper. So I do, some of my editors were women. Half our staff was women. I tried to be open, but I also understand the responsibility and the role I have. So I try to just publish the best writing and encourage. Before we even launched Gamut, we encourage people of color. We encourage a wide range of people, diverse voices, to submit marginalized voices that aren't getting the attention they deserve. And I think at the end of the day, that really helped us to publish a wider range of stories that a lot of people don't take the time to reach out and ask for or push to get. So I think there's a lot. So it's a lot of hard work, but I think it's a super satisfying and fulfilling experience, I think, if you do it right.
Got it. So what novels, short story collections, or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Oh, man. I've been struggling lately. I don't know if it's just all the chaos in the world, but I have not had much luck reading anything that's really blown me away recently. For my advanced creative writing workshop, we read the best of the year anthologies. So we do like the best horror, the best American sci-fi and fantasy, and then the best American literary. I always enjoy reading those 3 every year. I've been teaching those in my class for, I don't know, 5 years now, but I've been reading all 3 of those for a long time. So while I don't enjoy every story in every anthology, that's quite often where I'm getting my inspiration these days. From, out of 15, 20 stories in an anthology, I might teach 8 in my class. So those 8 stories from each anthology, each 10 stories, those are the ones that stood out to me. So I would say in the last couple of years, I could tell you some of the authors that really stood out to me. There's an author named Brian Hodge, who is somebody, it's funny because I think he was actually in Shiver 6 with me, or we published together somewhere a long time ago that I didn't recognize his name back then, but now he's in the best horror of the year almost every year. He's written some stories recently that have really blown me away. AC Wise had a story, 2 stories, and I think, was it last year, year before? She has one called Harvest Song, Gathering Song, and just blew my doors off. I love it. Maximalist, really weird surrealism, super cool stuff. I'm always a fan of Stephen Graham Jones. He has a new book out that I just got called, I want to make sure I get the title right. I think it's The Only Good Indian, or The Only Good Indians. I just got that book. I just ordered Paul Tremblay's new novel, Survivor Song. I think it's a novel, not a short story collection. And then what else did I get? I just got Mexican Gothic. Mexican, yeah, that's I'm trying to remember if that's Sylvia. Yeah, Sylvia Marina Garcia, Mexican Gothic. I just got that one. And what was the other one I just got? I can't think of it, but yeah. So those are kind of the things I'm reading right now I'm looking forward to reading.
Great.
Yeah.
So where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your stories and novels?
Couple places. I have a profile on Amazon. My blog is, whatdoesnotkillme.com, which is the Nietzsche quote, what does not kill me makes me stronger. That's for all my kind of personal stuff and my blogging and links to all my work. And then for my teaching, I have a website, storyvilleonline.com. The vast majority of the classes I teach are online. And so I teach people from all over the world because we meet up via Skype, and we have a secret Facebook group, and we email and whatnot. So Storyville Online is where I teach my contemporary dark fiction class and my advanced creative writing workshop, and then my novel workshop 365, which is you write a novel in a year. So those are my 2 main places. And then I'm on Facebook and Twitter too. I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Richard Thomas, author of 3 novels and 3 short story collections and many, many short stories. You can find his work online, so go buy a copy. And Richard, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Great.
This is Derek's O'Reilly Auto Parts story.
After the 3rd time jump-starting my car, I finally realized my battery was dying. So I stopped by O'Reilly to have it checked. They tested it right there in the parking lot. It was bad, real bad. But they helped me find the right battery for my car and even installed it for free. Now my car starts like new.